webinar. We are going to begin in a minute. Thank you folks for joining us. It is a great pleasure that this webinar series always turns up some interesting topics. When people get involved, then you hear of some interesting things that you've never thought of before. I had never thought about this subject, nor do I claim to know anything about this subject. I'm very thankful to Amir Durrani and Asafdar Suhail for bringing this together. It's a great topic, well worth thinking about, except that I know nothing about it, so I will not even pretend to say anything about it. We have idleness and mental health problems, challenges to Pakistan's demographic dividend. As I said, I have very little idea, but I think I'm very interested to learn. It'll be a fun topic. I can see lots of potential. I can see lots of things to say on this, but certainly I will hold myself and learn about it. So to begin with, let me say, Amir Durrani, who is one of the key architects of this webinar, who helps us organize a lot of things and is a key partner with PID and a key thinker in Pakistan. Amir Durrani heads Re-Energia, a very entrepreneurial consulting firm, as well as a entrepreneurial firm. So I would ask Amir to start the topic, introduce it, and kind of lead the discussion. Amir, over to you.
Nadeem Saab, thank you very much. I'm going to stick to English because still we don't know if we have any audience differences, but just to begin with, first and foremost, thank you very much for the introduction. I must say that actually this is Asafdar Suhail's idea. I actually only contributed to kindling it. So I think that he will do most of the introduction to the narrowing topic of what we call youth idleness. But my job, because Durran Ayab, I hope she's listening, backed out of doing this introduction. So I am actually taking this on. Like you, I know nothing. I'm a civil engineer. But my background of what I'm going to present is coming from me as a job provider, as an employer, as a person trying to create value in the Pakistan society by running a business. So I'll quickly share some screens, but I think that, Nabil, am I allowed to do this?
Yeah, you are. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. I am going to say share screen, select basic. Nabil, I'm unable to share screen, but in order to just sort of...
Sir, co-host can share screen.
But I'm unable to do so. Can you just show? I sent you the slides, but in the meantime, I'll start because I think I don't want to waste people's time.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let me know once you have the slides up, but let me just start talking about this. First and foremost, I think that, to introduce this topic of idleness, let's actually discuss about what is the demographic dividend that Pakistan keeps talking about and what are the opportunities and challenges. So first and foremost, I think Pakistan has access to demographic dividend. We have a high working age population and low dependency ratio, and basically that should result in increasing output. I mean, if I had the slides, I could show you the curves. What this really means is that we are going to be putting out about 2 million people, young people, by young meaning between the ages of 15 and 29, both sides included. We're going to be putting in about 2 million to 2.1 million people out into the workforce for the next 4 decades. Now that really spun my head. I didn't think it was that long. The question therefore would be, are we making them employable? And we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between what I call deployable and employable. The old economics, therefore, which you hear on TV and everywhere in Pakistan's economic discourse, states that therefore you should generate about 1 million jobs a year for 30 years to keep the steady state, i.e. the employment rate at where it is. However, I would like to posit a different question. I'd like to ask, according to new economics, we should ask the question, how do we keep the youth productive and deployed rather than just saying employed? Another very interesting feature of this demographic dividend is that the earner-consumer ratio really isn't going to stagnate or go down. Actually, according to some numbers, which I really don't believe in, but at least I should believe them for the next 10 years, UNDP had the goal to produce them until the 2100. But Nadeem Saab knows pretty well how that is done in a very systematic fashion. Nevertheless, even if we believe these numbers for the next 10 years, the sharp growth of the 15 to 64 age demographic, which means the proportion of workers in the total population keeps increasing steadily, and therefore should be leading to a traditional increase in GDP if all goes well. However, the dividend is not inevitable. Nabil, do we have the slides on, and can I show this one?
Sir,
Oh,
actually,
right, agree.
sir, you have sent
Okay.
to Nabil, but I haven't received so far.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Let me just quick, because I'm almost, yeah, very quickly, so we can show send these later on. So basically, having said and established that traditionally, as you know, the Nadeem Saab type economist and all the crowd says, we have a dividend that we are sitting on. The question is, can we cash it? And the other bigger question, which Nayab did not choose to answer today, is the dividend, what are the obstacles? So essentially, there are some traditional and there are some low, non-traditional obstacles. To me, the first thing is really traditionally, why are we not going to be able to cash the dividend? I mean, that's a hypothesis is because Pakistan, number one, has a very low savings rate, which means low investment, which means in very layman's term, low job production, no matter which sector we look at. Inappropriate education, again, it means low deployability. Inadequate healthcare, keeping us from our inability to deploy. And I think today's webinar really relates to that, which means that idleness as a disability, which more people are going to talk about. So we're basically killing deployability. And the other thing, which I think Javed Hassan is going to comment on, is inadequate human capital, which again leads to low deployability. Now, how do you define low deployability? In my simple terms, it's low deployability means a low skills match to job market plus low quality of entrepreneurial space, which in turn is the summation of bad regulation and unavailability of capital. The other thing, the last two things which we need to look at as obstacles to us cashing this dividend is also the cultural barrier and language barriers. Amongst the cultural barrier, a big one is the low female labor force participation, which is abysmally low, close to 20%. And last but not least, the future of work, what is coming ahead. Now, having said that, another thing which I think this whole discussion and debate links to is the traditional measurement of productivity and the role of youth. Now, traditionally, the way productivity is measured, basically the convention focus on role of producer, increasing output with respect to time, makes the youth, and I mean, amazingly, if you look at where youth are employed in the world, 77% of the world's youth are in the informal sector or employed by the informal economy. The percentage for Pakistan is 70%. What does this mean? Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. And I think these are the things why we've started this topic. But let's talk about, in the end, before handing over to Safdar Saab, is what are the likely threats if Pakistan does not orient policy, its current policy, to cash this dividend? You see, the problem there is not simply that there is obviously this vicious circle that our economists, somebody says you need to have a certain GDP growth rate to stimulate the youth. Whereas some of us say, well, if the youth are not cashed upon properly, then you will never have the GDP growth rate. So it seems to be like a chicken and egg question. But having said that, the first thing is, most likely, Pakistan does not achieve the growth rate. But the other important thing is, and that is actually borne out scientifically, is that the vulnerable population and the elderly and the very young, which is below 15, will sandwich and create large swaths of unproductive labor. Brain drain, rising youth dissatisfaction, societal stratification, civil disorder. I mean, the list is enormous. For a country like Pakistan, I don't need to really get you guys thinking even more vividly, but essentially, I leave it at that. It is a national security threat, larger than any that we are traditionally thinking about. So with that setting of the stage, I'd like Nadeem Saab to hand it over to Sohail Saab to set the stage for the exact next two discussions. Thank you.
Nadeem Saab, should I start? Well, I must start by thanking PIDE. Briefly, Amir has set the context and how we started talking about it. Before I kind of introduce the topic in greater detail, I would like to welcome Ms. Arfa Subuhi, Dr. Rizwan Taj, and Saeed Hassan Javed more formally, who are our panelists today, who have joined, taken out their time, and they are with us. Now, we with some friends, we have established a think tank dedicated to social protection called Social Protection Resource Center. So, how have we arrived here? That would actually introduce the topic also. I mean, we all know that social protection usually has two main elements. One is health protection and the other is the financial protection. And practically speaking, our traditional social security, which was accepted as a right in 1976 UN Convention on Civil Rights, that is work-based. So you have largely work-based social security and then social insurance, and finally, if needed, social assistance or income transfers also kick in. Now, if you look at the current context internationally, we have two approaches to social protection. One is the UN approach of social protection floors, where ILO is the lead, but other agencies, World Bank is also there, where you try to have floors against the vulnerabilities which could be there. We had this pandemic, we have disasters, we have poverty, hunger, such things. And the other aspect is the lifespan aspect, that you try to provide social protection from childhood to the old age. Now, in this context, normally one would not hear about the adolescent or youth, because it is expected that they would have minimum health needs, and they would be, as one of the ILO study put it, that in education, in training, most of them would be there, and then they would go to the job market. But if we start having health needs of adolescents and youth, then it would create a new phenomena for the social protection needs. Now, at Social Protection Resource Center, we have been working from all the three perspectives. One of our major report on state of social protection in Pakistan would be issued in 2 weeks' time. We have already brought out state of old age well-being in Pakistan, which we launched with the help of WHO on the 1st October UN Day of Older Persons. And our report on disability would be launched this year, the annual state of care of old age of person with disability on 3rd December. That's the International Day of Disability. And actually, this is the theme of the this year's International Day of Disability, which brought us to this topic, which is invisible disabilities, which are also called intellectual disabilities. But when we were looking at the old age and persons with disabilities, when we did the surveys for pandemic, there we came across the two phenomena across the lifespan context: a surge in intellectual disabilities among the youth and women. So from the lifespan perspective, we see a surge, which is confirmed by the doctors, that the intellectual disabilities, which usually would cover both the developmental disorders, that is autism, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, and would also include the psychosocial disorders. So these are kind of globally also, they are on the rise, and in Pakistan too. The second major phenomenon which we came across was that this surge was across the classes. So you find intellectual disability among the youth, adolescents and youth, both in upper classes as well as in the working and middle classes. Now, when you find intellectual disability in older persons, you understand its dynamics, and it would enhance your health protection needs. But when we have high levels of intellectual disability among women and then among the adolescents and youth, there the socioeconomic implications are much bigger. But we have realized that this is a new phenomena in Pakistan, and it needs to be studied much better. So in this context, we started looking at the adolescent well-being as in itself a major topic of social protection. And there, when we looked at the out of labor force population, one way to understand the linkage of youth with the job market, labor market, is the number of people which are in the third category. As we all know that the labor force survey conducted by Pakistan Bureau of Statistics would have first category people in the employment, then the people who are seeking the employment, and then out of labor force population. Now, usually we would think, and it's largely correct, because the biggest chunk of people out of labor force is the women. But now we have this increasing trend that we have larger number of youth in the third category. Right now, according to the latest labor force survey 2017, 55% of youth is out of labor force. Now, 30 million people, it's already high. People are, of course, in education, in training, but there is a large missing number. We have tried to unpack this number. In principle, Pakistan Bureau of Statistics should do, but we believe that there is a high number, which is growing in number, which we have called idle. Now, this is the idle population, which is our focus in today's webinar and in our forthcoming research, that what is this paradoxical situation that on the one hand, we have very relatively low unemployment rates in Pakistan. The number of people out of labor force is swelling, and then the productivity of people on the job is also either stagnant or going down, as Amir has also said. So first of all, we need to revisit the way we collect and present our data. Now, as we started from the disability perspective in the whole question, we asked this question that whether this is the intellectual disability which is keeping youth out of labor force, or is it other way around, that work is creating high levels of anxiety, depression, etc., and they then get out of the workforce, and then they stop even seeking the employment and come into the third category. Now, this took us to the interesting question of the productivity of the youth in the job, that what is the quality, psychological quality of our youth, which is manifested in terms of higher or lower productivity on the job. And there, everybody would tell you so many anecdotes that the youth in the service have these attitudinal problems, which are verging at behavioral disorders and procrastination, etc. All they are real problems at the organizational level. The productivity is a problem. Retention of good human resource is a problem. Job hopping is a problem. People cannot sustain their jobs. So I can conclude that the way we looked at this was that we are facing three sets of problems. Number one is that the quality of young people coming to the job market is low, and this needs to be explored. This would be perhaps linked with stunting, with low IQ, which is produced by stunting also, but there could be many other reasons, and we tend to think that the poverty and inequality are putting a lot of social pressures on the adolescents and youth coming from the working class. So there, that linkage has to be studied. Then that is one major problem that we have. On job performance of youth, that is a second set of problem that we need to address. And then the third one, which is about the idleness, that why so many people do not even want to work. And if it continues like that, what would happen to the demographic dividend? And these three sets of questions for the policymakers, organizations, parents, community. These are extremely important questions because this phenomena, if left unchecked, can have very serious consequences. For example, in Nairobi, a latest study of 2019 asserts that on the streets of Nairobi, actually the name of the study is The Idle Youth in the Streets. 65% of the youth in Nairobi is on the street, involved either in petty crimes or just roaming around, small time mugging. And then they have formed into ethnic outfits which fight with each other in the slums, and they have become self-appointed vigilante, and they have absolutely no appetite now to work. They're not even ready to work, and 90% of this 65% youth has intellectual disability. And Dr. Rizwan Taj would tell that at the earlier stages of intellectual disability, you can manage it, but once you go deep into it, it becomes much more difficult, and then make them work or use work as a treatment of disability also has limitations if you wait too long. In Indonesia, they are taking this issue very seriously, and there are many studies there. They write in the studies that adolescent well-being is a public good, and it's state's responsibility to look at the causes and offer the remedies. If you look at Pakistani phenomena, the Urdu equivalents of idleness, for example. So we have many pejorative words for idle like awara, nikamma, farig. In Punjabi, they call it vela. Now, these are all pejorative terms. They could be a lure or attraction for being idle in the working class youth, which could be mediated by the media, or you idealize being free as well off. Or social media may also be creating such environment where you are apparently busy the whole day, but you do not earn any much or are not productive. But we also feel that this phenomena of idleness needs to be looked at much more sympathetically also. There may be serious socioeconomic pressures, domestic violence, other pressures which are creating the intellectual disability, which then results in the low
So, everybody, sorry to
energy.
interrupt. Just letting you know, we are at 7:27. I'm
Yeah, this is my last sentence. So with this context that this phenomena needs to be studied sympathetically, we designed this seminar and requested Ms. Arfa Subuhi, who is the PS officer. She spent many years at the end of her career as Director General of the Civil Services Academy to talk about the psychological quality of the people who joined the service. And then we have requested Dr. Rizwan Taj to share his thoughts about the psychosocial causes which are resulting in the kind of youth that we have. And then finally would have NAPTEC, which they would talk about the possible correction in the labor market through training. So now over to Mr. Rizwan Taj.
Dr. Nadeem, just to let you know before Rizwan Taj says, according to him, I'm officially a miscreant in the society. So I'm going to disappear from the screen while he speaks.
Let me just quickly, before I bring in Rizwan Taj Sahab is a consulting psychiatrist. He would know a lot more about this subject. But Rizwan Sahab, before you come on, let me quickly put in my 2 cents worth from what I've heard. I think we are talking about the youth, and one thing that Saptar Sahab has said, we've got a stunted population. It seems that we have a low IQ population. Is that correct? Are we all now mentally bereft? If we are mentally bereft, then let's not talk about it. We are a stunted population. We are totally, low IQ, incapable of doing anything. So why worry about it? Let's go on. Second thing that worries me is when people say states should do this. The state has already done enough. State has ruined everything as far as we can see. We've done a lot of work on this. State has killed the country. The state has killed the economy. The state is fighting for power and they're destroying everything around them. The third thing, Rizwan Sab, that I'd like to put to you is, why do we look to the state? And secondly, I think it's not just the youth who are idle. I noticed the elders are idle too. The entire offices in Pakistan are idle. The entire culture is one of idleness. Please, Rizwan Sahib, am I wrong? Explain this to us.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to appreciate the organizers for this extremely crucial and very important for Pakistan, this topic. And there's a lot that can be achieved. And unfortunately, very few people are looking at this area. And if Pakistan is to be progressive and have its place in the community of nations, we must mobilize our youth and we must help them achieve excellent standards so that they are successful future in their lives and their work as well. Now, I'm not just a psychiatrist, I'm also the principal of the Government Medical College in Islamabad. And I am also the Dean of Medicine in PIMS as well. So we deal with a range of youth, jo postgraduates and jo undergraduates hain. And of course, being the principal, so I'm also to look at the people who are working under me, including the faculty and the support staff as well. So unke behavior ko main dekhta hu, and I really feel very sad that people in general are very, very, you really need to push them to make them work. And nobody wants to work and everybody wants a free salary, and the government job is a cushy job and you have it forever, nobody can kick you out. The rules are so strict. And if I look at my faculty, so I think maybe out of 100 people, say 30% are actually very, very hard workers. The rest are just passing their time. And the same goes for the support staff as well, that you really, when I ask them that, what is this guy doing? What is his job? What is his job description? Nobody has an answer. वो बस छुट्टी दे दें, promotion कर दें, seniority कर दें, and that's all they are concerned about. And then when we look at the students, तो मैं भी उसके भी थोड़े से statistics share करूँगा आपसे कि उनमें क्या हो रहा है. और किसी ने इन्होंने gender की बात की, तो we have open merit system in the medical school. Our school is the Federal Medical College is the top merit school in Islamabad. So 70% of the girls are taking admission and 30% are the boys. और जब हम long-term work पे जाते हैं, the girls who are working is maybe less than 30%. So most of them end up as housewife raising children. And it's so painful because it takes a lot of effort and a lot of money, and the government spends a lot of money on these students. And it's all gone to waste because they are absolutely not interested to work, and they probably have other reasons for joining the medical school. So all these are sort of across the board problems. So let me, the topic that I was allocated, I was told to just do it in 10 minutes, is the youth personality problem. So we've been actually focusing on this since the new government came up, and the president had a lot of interest and he had given it 3 year corona aa gaya and everything sort of collapsed. So I will talk about the, ये slide nazar aa rahi hai aap logon ko?
बिल्कुल आ रही है.
Youth is really a very interesting time, and the age range, the 15 to 24, is very, very interesting and very important part of your life, where everything is changing, physical, emotional, behavior, everything is changing. You are growing up, your hormones are bursting out, and your body is changing, and your behavior is changing, and you are developing new experiences, and you are looking at things. So it's a very interesting and exciting time. And this is the time where some sort of advice, guidance, direction will make a huge difference to your life in the future. And this is also the age of very high sensitivity. So anything that happens, any incident, be it a positive incident or a negative incident, it would have a very big impact on the youth. So it's a time of change, and it lays the foundation for the future. So what happens during this period, and how we manipulate and how we create an environment and how we help them focus on their future and their behavior and their personality and how they develop is so important. So see some of the factors. Now, the genetics are always there. You inherit what your parents' personality was to some extent. And of course, in the last 10 years, the studies have shown that with environmental strong influences, such as abuse, be it physical or sexual, your genetics are changed. Your genetics at genes levels, there are changes in your system. So to some extent, the genetics are always there. You inherit if your father was aggressive or whatever, you will also inherit some of those tendencies or whatever the problem may be. So genetics are always there, and it's a chunk of your personality, say with 30 to 40%. And then you go on to the events and experiences that you have since childhood. And even to the extent when the child is in the stomach of the mother, and what she does, what she eats, the music she hears, the conversation she has, the mood she shows, it has an influence on the child. And if the mother is depressed during pregnancy, the child is confirmed to show behavior problems when he enters school. So this is the level of changes in the environment that influence you. And then as you go on to the school and then onwards, any events or experiences, whatever they may be, positive or negative, they will certainly keep imprint on your life and will reflect later on. So crucial to look and watch and all the things that happen in your life, whatever they may be. And then there's the question of role models. So I had a very good, interesting question I used to ask students, ke, aapka role model kaun hai? And of course, most of them didn't have an answer. Kafi arse tak to Imran Khan hi naam lete rahe. But later on, they had no answer. I mean, they had no role model to follow. And that is so sad, so sad. And I said, no, just forget about people and personalities on TV. Just forget about people around you, maybe your father, your uncle, your brother, whatever. Look at him, see, maybe you find something positive in him. So role models ka bada kaam hai, and we have failed to generate, so maybe a few cricketers or something, to generate role models for our youth, ke wo usko dekhen, usko follow karen, usse kuch seekhen. Then you have all been talking about disabilities. It's such a big topic. It's such a big topic कि आप सोच भी नहीं सकते कि इसमें ये नहीं है सिर्फ कि autism तो बहुत बड़ी और serious बीमारी है, उससे lower level पे काफी problems हैं. You might have a reading problem, you might have a maths problem, you might have an IQ की range है, तो उसमें आपकी lower side पे जा रही है, so that means कि you will not be able to function as well as a person who has a slightly higher IQ. तो उसमें range है पूरी चीजों की. और वो सब टेस्टों में डिटेक्ट हो जाती है. नोबडी डज दैट हियर, नोबडी नोज कि क्या हो रहा है. तो वो चीजें हैं, ऑब्वियसली उनकी स्टडीज भी इफेक्ट होती है, उनकी लाइफ भी इफेक्ट होती है. तो डिसेबिलिटीज की बहुत बड़ा टॉपिक है, इसमें बहुत बड़ी रेंज है. तो आपने ऑटिज्म की बात की, तो ऑटिज्म तो बहुत बड़ा डिसऑर्डर है, लेकिन ऑटिस्टिक फीचर्स ज्यादा कॉमन है. यू माइट हैव 1 or 2 फीचर्स ऑफ ऑटिज्म, विच में सोशल विड्रॉल है या जो भी है. यू माइट नॉट हैव द फुल ब्लोन ऑटिज्म स्पेक्ट्रम डिसऑर्डर, और उसके साथ 10 और बीमारियां जिस तरह एस्पर्जर्स है, ये वो जो होती हैं, जो लोग समझते ही नहीं है. तो वो भी एक इशू है कि ये चीजें डिटेक्ट ही नहीं होती हैं, बिकॉज इफ यू नो कि दिस पर्सन हैज दैट काइंड ऑफ प्रॉब्लम सिंस चाइल्डहुड, दे कैन बी डिटेक्टेड एट 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 की एज में. देन यू कैन एक्चुअली गाइड देम कि आपने ये करना है, वो करना है, वो करना है, और ये आप नहीं कर सकते, ये आप कर सकते हैं. एंड ऑल द टाइम वी सी people who are being pushed by their families कि तुमने ये करना है, तुमने स्कूल में जाना है, तुमने पढ़ना, whereas they do not have the capacity to do that. फिर आप आ जाएं relationships पे. The development of personality of the youth is so crucial for relationships, and it depends on the kind of relationships he or she has with the people around him, be it friends, be it his grandparents, be it his parents, whoever it is. So if you have a strong, confident, supportive parent figure or any person in your life, you will always do well, you will always be confident, and you will always have trust in other people. So in our kind of work, relationships are so crucial that you cannot imagine how important having a good, strong relationship is. फिर आपके पास opportunities की बात आती है. You have people who are going to all the good schools, and you have people who are going to the madrasas, and we've forgotten about the millions of kids in the madrasa. I really don't know where they are going and what they're doing and what is happening to them. And then you have the people going to these ghost schools जो government run करती है, nobody knows where they are, और वो आते हैं जाते हैं, उनको कोई पता नहीं है हमें कि वो कहाँ पे हैं, क्या हो रहे हैं. And you know that school में actually जो there, as you go up the ladder from primary to secondary, the people dropout rate keeps on moving very fast in Pakistan, और हम बांग्लादेश और श्रीलंका और नेपाल से बहुत पीछे हैं in terms of attainment in education. Then you go on to religion. Again, religion, I don't want to talk too much about it, but it's something very important in our lives. It is something that is embedded in our system that we can use it positively as well. मैं सिर्फ ये बात करूंगा इस पे कि उसको हम positively भी use कर सकते हैं. So religion has an impact, and we must keep that in mind. We can't ignore it and we cannot dismiss it. फिर आ जाता है आपका culture. तो जो आपको घर में कल्चर मिलता है, जो आपको स्कूल में कल्चर मिलता है, जो आपको दोस्तों में कल्चर मिलता है, वो आप सारी उम्र कैरी करते हैं. तो that could be a culture of doing hard work, that could be a culture of idleness, that could be a culture of being sort of psychopathy का हो सकता है, anti-social elements हो सकते हैं. So culture is also there. Then we go on to the media, and in this day and age, the media is so terribly important. As be it the social media जो आपके साथ 24 घंटे आपके पास, everybody has a phone, you can't deny that. तो आप उसमें messages पढ़ते हैं, negative भी होते हैं, positive भी होते हैं, आप उससे ये भी होता है, आप उससे encourage भी हो सकते हैं, discourage भी हो सकते हैं. And of course, just to give you an idea, जो कोरोना हुआ था तो हमें तो सारा यही आता था कि हमारे फलाने डॉक्टर को हो गया, फलाने डॉक्टर की डेथ हो गई. It was very, very painful for us. So media and television में आप, you see all these people fighting with each other, using bad language all the time. This is happening. So the media will influence the youth. The youth will see that. और फिर आप जब ड्रामों की तरफ आते हैं तो they have no other issue except marriage. And it is so unfortunate that marriage के अलावा पाकिस्तान में कोई ड्रामों के लिए कोई issue नहीं है. They will not talk about social issues. They will not talk about positivity. They will not talk about youth development. They will talk only about one issue, and that is marriage. Unfortunate. Then you talk about economics. Again, there's a disparity between the have-nots and the haves. And ours is a medical school of the government, and the fees is very nominal. लेकिन हर रोज मेरे पास application आती है कि unfortunately I'm from Gilgit and I'm from Balochistan and I can't pay. Please मेरा ये कुछ कर दें, मुझे postpone कर दें, मेरी fees को postpone कर दें. And I feel very bad about this. ये disparity है हमारे माशरे में. And then you go on to the injuries. So if you have injury of any kind, be it emotional because of abuse, be it physical because of head injury, उससे आपकी intellectual performance or future performance पे बहुत ज़्यादा फर्क पड़ता है. So when we take a history, we always ask कि बचपन में आपको कभी epileptic fit नहीं पड़ा था, आप कभी गिर तो नहीं गए थे, आपकी पैदाइश के वक्त did you have a forceps delivery, did you have a head injury or something like that. तो ये चीजें हम पूछते हैं. Did your mother fall when you were pregnant? All these things are very important also. Any kind of injury. And then we go on to the emotional injury where जितनी भी studies हुई हैं उनमें prove किया है कि the emotional injuries are more, or abuse is more severe in terms of long-term impact as compared to sexual and physical abuse. The emotional abuse. Emotional abuse means not talking, not communicating properly, giving a cold shoulder, whatever uski definition mein aata hai, wo that's even more severe than being physically abused or sexually abused. So these are some of the influences that I'm just calling you. And then you have the pressures as you grow up and you become a youth. You have the academic pressure of trying to study and having a syllabus which is very, very difficult to manage. You have the personal issues. You are growing up and you are developing relationships and you are not able to handle them. And you are developing all kinds of problems because of them. So ye personal issues hain. You might be carrying baggage from your home to your work, to your study place. Wo bhi hai. Financial ka maine zikr kar diya. Phir you might be physically damaged in some way, and that would be affecting you. And you might be insecure about the future ki kya hoga, kya nahi hoga, mera future kya hoga. Everybody is insecure. So what is the personality? So aap jab kisi se milte hain, when you go and meet somebody, and you talk to them and you ask them questions and you meet them again and you test them in different situations. It is actually what you're trying to do is assess them. Can I trust this guy? Is he a good, be a good friend? You're doing is you're assessing his personality. It's a combination of our habits, our traits, the way we react in our environment, combination of behavior. Cognition means कि हमारी सोच कैसी है, किस level पर है, और हमारे emotional patterns क्या, are we an emotional person, are we a cold person, are we a stable person? तो ये 5 basic traits हैं कि I don't want to go into detail because मेरा time भी कम है. Neuroticism basically means that you are very sensitive in your moods and you are unstable. इस तरह का person जो है आपकी work environment के लिए एक problem create. Extroversion means going out, being outgoing and all that. That is helpful to a certain extent and being very strong-willed and everything else. Agreeableness be to some extent is also very good. Openness to experience is also very good to some extent. But consciousness is the most important part of this. And honesty मैंने पाकिस्तान के लिए डाला है because people are generally dishonest. You can understand that. No, I might meet 100 people every day, and I fail to find 1 or 2 who are not dishonest. And that is a problem in Pakistan. So honesty is a trait that we value very much. So we talk about consciousness, which is very, very important to the productive workforce. Usme the quality of wishing to do one's work or duty well and thoroughly, इसमें efficacy आ जाती है, उसमें being organized आ जाता है, उसमें being responsible आ जाता है, उसमें being goal directed आ जाता है. ये आपके point of view से सबसे important criteria वो ये है. So you need to understand that there's no one size fits all. Everybody is different. So if you have a room full of 100 people, you have 100 different people, 100 different personalities, and they all react differently to different circumstances. Be it some kind of a trauma or something, somebody will run away, somebody will laugh it away, somebody will become quiet, somebody will start crying. So everyone is different and everyone's circumstances are different. Now we come on to the topic which is very crucial to what we are discussing, mental health. ये जो इसका उर्दू में तर्जुमा है ज़हनी सेहत, which applies to everyone. It doesn't mean ज़हनी बीमारी, it means आपकी ज़हनी कैफियत, ज़हनी सेहत कैसी है. And what it means is that you are able to lead a fulfilling life. You are able to perform normal, good relationships. You are able to study. You are able to work. You are able to pursue leisure interests, and you are able to make day-to-day decisions about the future. So this is actually the crux of the problem that we are talking about. If we are in good mental health, we can achieve and do anything that we wish to do and are motivated to do. So mental health is where we are focused on at this time. So what helps? अभी मैंने आपको relationships का बता दिया, good role models का बता दिया. All the evidence shows that having small families helps. All the positive reinforcement is probably one of the most important aspects of everything. तो अभी जब हम कोरोना के लिए डॉक्टर्स के लिए हम और नर्सेस के लिए पैकेज बना रहे थे कि हमको कैसे करें, तो मैंने उनको कहा कि you need to reinforce their behavior. तो आपने उनको अच्छे सर्टिफिकेट्स देने हैं, उनको प्रमोशंस देनी है, उनको financial incentives देनी है ताकि वो और motivate हों. And this helped. They all got more certificates and everything. So positive reinforcement means being praised for everything that you do. So important because it is a determinant and of your behavior in the future. Having a stable home environment, जिस तरह आपको पता है कि domestic violence is very common and we need to look into that. But having a stable home environment has an effect on your personality, and you actually follow what is going on in your home, in your future life. Opportunities for a good education, मैंने discuss कर ली है. Education, attainment and retention is very, very important for us as a country. उस पे हमें focus करना है कि how we keep our students in our education system so that they at least complete their basic education. And protection or absence of negative influences. आपके इर्द-गिर्द abuse की मैंने बात कर ली, यहाँ पे मैं drugs का जिक्र करूँगा. So drugs will destroy a youth, and drugs are so bad, and everything is available in Pakistan. आप नाम लें, everything, ecstasy, ice, जो ice का हमें नहीं पता था 2-3 साल पहले से वो भी शुरू हो गया, and every second person is on it. You've got heroin, you've got all that. तो वो आपकी personality को damage करती है और आपके future जो आपकी work environment है उसको खराब करती है. What is required? An ability to meet the demands of the situation. Everyone needs to be healthy mentally, physically to meet the demands of a competitive, highly demanding life. ये मैं थोड़ा सा हमने एक स्टडी की थी 400 यूथ पे जो मेडिकल स्टूडेंट्स थे, and we were I'll just go on to the last part of it. We found out that 70% of the students had anxiety, 42% had depression. ये last year October में की थी 2000. This is before the corona hit the health system. And then there was also an association that there was suicidal ideation was very common. उसमें हमें जो सबसे important थी वो sleep pattern का problem. 80% of the youth had sleep problem. ये medical students की बात है. So again, this is some of the data that we collected, and we were surprised at the high prevalence of depression, anxiety, sleep, suicide. Everything was there in the population, and we were extremely anxious about that. उसकी वजह से हमने policy बनाई. So what is required is an understanding across the board that personality development as important as getting grades. हमारे जो parents हैं वो totally focused है कि मेरा बच्चा इधर आ जाए, मेरा बच्चा top कर ले. They are not actually interested कि उनकी personality development कैसे हो रही है. What kind of a person he is becoming. He could become the gold medalist and he would be useless in the work field. He would not be productive because he really doesn't have the skill to talk to someone, communicate with someone, actually manage a team. All these things are so important that we are not focused on this part, and this is equally important as compared to getting good grades as well. And this is something that we need to get across to the teachers and to the parents in general. Some recommendation है mentorship होनी चाहिए. All students should have mentorship programs जिसमें कोई senior उनको guide करे, उनकी support करे, उनको a sensible senior I'm talking about, और उनको professionals के साथ link होना चाहिए, उनकी screening होनी चाहिए, lifestyle उनको advice होनी चाहिए, extra academic activities so important to develop your personality, relationships अच्छी होनी चाहिए, strong होनी चाहिए, training of teachers. All the teachers should be trained in mental health. No second thoughts about that. It doesn't cost anything. It just costs a little bit. They need to know and be aware of mental health issues, and they must be trained in them, and they must have basic counseling skills. All the teachers should have that. I feel that is something we all can contribute to, we all can help in. और इसमें कोई ज़्यादा आपको बजट नहीं चाहिए, कुछ नहीं चाहिए. सोशल मीडिया को यूज करें, जिस तरह इन्होंने कोरोना में यूज किया कि आप फोन उठाते हैं and they start talking कि आप हाथ धोएं, ये करें, वो करें. We can put in positive messages for the youth. We can put in positive guidance for the youth on the social media. And then you'll need to look at curriculum. उसमें भी mental health and personality development होना चाहिए. We must put that in the schools so that the students at a very early age know about this and are able to understand कि ये भी important एक aspect है life का. It is not just about getting 80 out of 100, whatever A, B, C, whatever grade. Awareness programs for the families, for the students, for the teachers, for the population in general. Very, very crucial, very, very important. So final words, the youth must be prepared to deal with life matters with strength of character and develop healthy life skills, anger and stress management. They must realize that their actions will have consequences and their hard work and efforts will be rewarded. Thank you very much.
Ji, thank you very much, Dr. Rizwan. Now we go to Ms. Arfa Subuhi.
Thank you, Dr. Suhail. So thank you for inviting me to this webinar. So right at the outset, let me clarify that my talk today is a practitioner's viewpoint and based to a great extent on my interaction with the young civil servants who are inducted through the process of CSS examinations. So I spent, as Dr. Suhail initially said, quite a few years in Civil Services Academy, both as an instructor and then as the Director General. And I also have the privilege of working in public sector training institutions at all levels, really. So as you're very well aware that through the CSS examinations, the Federal Public Service Commission inducts officers in civil service to 12 different services. And once they are inducted, all of them have to go through a common training program at the Civil Services Academy, which is then followed up by a specialized training program at the various training institutions. So I'll talk about three aspects of the topic that has been assigned to me. That is the psychological quality of youth, and I'm talking of the young people who are entering civil service as such. So I'll give a few basic facts about the young people who join the civil services. Then I'll talk about their attitudinal and mental health issues, which we have observed as faculty at training institutions. And lastly, I'll deliberate on why, in my view, and that's a practitioner's viewpoint really, why the young officers exhibit negative personality traits or attitudinal issues for that matter. So a few words about the general profile of the civil servants who are inducted in the civil service. So in the first place, the entrants are not very young. So if during the 1950s and 1960s, the average age of the successful candidates through the CSS examination was 22 years or 23 years, now it is 27 or 28 years. For the past few years, the average age is 27. Occasionally, we have batches where the average age of the inductees is 29. The current common training program that is being conducted at the Civil Services Academy, the youngest probationary officer is 23 years of age and the oldest is 33 years of age. So you can well imagine that the age at which they are joining the service is one where the attitudes and whatever their personality is has already been developed, and it is difficult to bring about a change at that point in time. A sizable chunk of the inductees in civil service have previous work experience in government or the private sector. And this generally ranges between 60 to 70%. This year, for example, 70% of those inducted in civil service have previous government experience, 32% have experience of government, 38% have experience in the private sector. 80 to 85% of the selectees join civil service after 16 years of education. Now, this includes not only people with master's degree or any other postgraduate degree, this also includes candidates who have 4 years BA, BS programs, or who have earned professional degrees like engineering or MBBS, which also requires 4 to 5 years of education after intermediate. So the interesting thing to note is that graduates of well-reputed private sector universities like LUMS, like IBA, like NUST, that is on the rise since the past 5 years or so. And this year, 24% of the total intake in civil service are graduates of these three institutions. 25 have joined from the LUMS, 23 have come from NUST, 3 from IBA, and traditionally those who graduate from IBA, generally their numbers ranges between 3 to 5, not more than this. So during the 1950s and 60s, the vast majority of those joining the civil service belonged to the middle class, and only 5% came from the lower middle class. Some 20% came from upper class. But over the years, if you look at the reports of the Federal Public Service Commission, the number of inductees from middle class has increased, and the number of inductees from lower middle class is also on the rise. And I think it's also important to say that since the last 10 years or so, the number of women selected through the CSS examination has also risen. And for the past 5 years or so, the percentage of women who join civil service is about 40%. In certain batches, this even goes up to 45% or so. Now, if we come to the personality traits or the attitudinal and behavioral issues of those joining civil service, I think at the very outset, I think it's known to everybody that CSS candidates have to go through a psychological test, different psychological tests for that matter, to determine their personality traits and their general abilities. But you might know that the psychologist's reports are not binding on the commission, which does look at them, but it has a discretion to take its own decision based on the interview and based on the written examination reports as such. So the second thing is that these assessment reports, the assessment reports of those who are selected to civil service, they are never shared with the Civil Services Academy or for that matter with the ministries. So it is as if we start from scratch finding out about the existing competencies or abilities of these people and their personality traits as such. And we do that during the training period, looking at their demonstrated performance and their demonstrated attitudes. And based on my experience, I can say that the majority of the officers do demonstrate characteristics of being extroverts, of being quite confident, of being sociable. But traits or abilities like leadership, like being willing workers of a team, of being open to new ideas and culture, emotional stability, or intellect that seeks out new knowledge, orderliness or diligence or commitment and conscientiousness, as Dr. Taj stated. These are characteristics which are very variable. They vary from person to person. So one of the first things that we notice is lack of discipline amongst the civil servants who are inducted. And by discipline, I mean that's demonstrated not just through absenteeism or lack of attention in classes or being unpunctual to training activities, missing deadlines, etc. So in training institutions, it is possible for the faculty to enforce discipline in trainees by way of both positive and negative reinforcement. But at workplace, the officers very quickly adapt themselves to the organizational culture, and which generally does not promote self-discipline. In work, the officers, the civil servants, exhibit to a large extent a lack of diligence, a lack of industriousness, commitment to work or conscientiousness. And as an example, I can tell you that most top achievers of the CSS examinations prefer to rest on their laurels, and it is as if they have already attained the social recognition that they wanted to achieve, and it's as if they really don't want to prove anything else. So in 2011, the Civil Services Academy conducted a study of 3 batches from 2008 to 2010. So 3 batches falling within these years. And one of the major reasons why we conducted the study was because we were noticing a great variance in the merit that was determined by the Federal Public Service Commission and the merit that we were coming up with based on the performance of the new inductees in civil service, based on the performance in the common training program in the training institution. So what we found was that only about 20% of the top 20, which comprises about 10% of the entire batch. So only 20% of the top 20 position takers in the CSS examinations were able to remain within the first 20 in the common training program. And we also found that 66% of the top achievers in CSS had scored exceptionally well only in one subcomponent of the CSS examination, because we were looking at the CS examination having 3 subcomponents, people getting marks in mandatory papers and compulsory papers, the marks that they score in optional papers, and the marks that they score in interview. And we found that the top achievers were doing exceptionally well in only one of these subcomponents. And one of the inferences that we made was that the top performers do not really exhibit, do not really have well-rounded personalities. So leadership ability is variable, but it generally improves during the common training program or other training programs for that matter. But what is really lacking, and you find this in workplaces as well, is that people are not willing team members. They are not willing to put in their best effort as a team member. So in most group assignments that we give during training, we find that the leaders are generally on their own, and if they are lucky, they'll get 1 or 2 members within their team who are willing to pull their weight. So as I said, this is an attitude that you find on display at the workplace as well. And we generally find only very, very few reliable or willing workers who also give their best to the organization that they work for. And the result is that generally such people or such civil servants are overburdened with work. And since there are no negative repercussions for the non-performers, they get away with it. So there is also generally a tendency not to be very methodical in work, so that while analyzing issues, I find that a broad brush treatment is adopted by civil servants, and the details, the necessary details that you need to look at and that you need to analyze and examine, that is missed out. So there's a tendency also to take the easy way out. If you can Google something up, you will Google it without looking at whether the information that you are coming up with is credible or not, whether it's credible research. So there's also a shirking of hardcore research in civil service. So without commenting on the intellectual ability of the officers, I would like to say that there is generally a lack of curiosity to seek out new knowledge and to look at new and better ways of doing things in the public sector. So that is why, Dr. Nadeem ul-Haq just said that there is a lot of idleness, especially in public sector. There is, because I think that's something that the organizational culture really promotes. Increasingly, we are also noticing mental health issues in those inducted in the civil service. And we come across young officers who have depression. At times, it is severe enough for them to share with the faculty that they are having thoughts, suicidal thoughts as such. And when we discuss the issues with them, it generally comes out that such officers have family issues, or they come from broken homes, or are under great stress for one reason or the other. The attitudinal issues have also been on the rise, and the mental health issues have become so great that for the past 6 years or so, the Civil Services Academy actually has been engaging services of psychologists to sort of give consultation to officers who seek such consultation. Lately, the CSA has even conducted psychometric tests of newly inducted officers through a panel of psychologists, and they've also trained, to a certain extent, faculty of the CSA to identify mental health issues and how to engage with such officers. On rare occasions, some officers have even had to be hospitalized because of severe mental issues. I remember one probationary officer who spent 2 months in the psychiatry ward of CMH, and the report that we got, the medical report that we got, which we shared with the with his ministry, was that he simply cannot take stress. He incidentally had been recruited in the police service of Pakistan. So you do have such issues, and very occasionally we are also coming across cases of drug abuse in training institutions. So there are a number of reasons which cause these attitudinal issues. I'm not talking about the mental health issues. I'm really talking about the phenomenon of idleness, or the phenomenon of not being a willing worker, of not being industrious or diligent. And I think that to a large extent, this is caused by the organizational culture that prevails in the public sector. And it is one which demotivates real workers, makes a lot of people cynical, because they see that whether you work well or whether you are an average worker or a below average worker, you are being treated the same way. What I'm trying to say is that the government's reward and punishment system is not one which encourages or motivates officers to demonstrate positive attitude or to be diligent or committed or thorough professionals. And if I look at, just the training aspect of human resource management, I can tell you that the rules under which the inter se seniority of officers is determined within their own occupational group is one where the maximum weightage is given to CSS, to their performance in CSS examination, and their subsequent performance in service at the Civil Services Academy during the Common Training Program, at the Specialized Training Program, or subsequently at the final passing out examination, that is not great enough to overset the marks that they got at the CSS. So there's very little motivation to perform very well during the training as such. Then also we have, of course, the performance evaluation reports, which are fairly exaggerated. But despite that, I'll say that in the pen picture and in other parts of the performance evaluation reports, where we have to indicate the strengths and the weaknesses of the officers and what kind of training is required, the unfortunate aspect is that these are never evaluated at in the career planning wings of any ministry as such, or any division as such. Performance evaluation reports or training evaluation reports will be considered only at the time of promotion. So what is the use if the trainer or if the supervisor has indicated issues in attitude of that person, in the way that he works, in his personality traits? Those are not going to be addressed during work. And also that's one reason I feel that when the reforms that have taken place about retirement, compulsory retirement after 20 years may run into problems, because if person has not been counseled on what his weaknesses are. And if the ministries or the divisions have not invested in his training, helping him overcome those weaknesses, I think it's going to be difficult when that person takes his compulsory retirement to a court. Then deviations to good behavior are rarely penalized, the most common punishment being transfer. So departments don't invest in helping officers overcome their capacity issues. Penal action is not taken on unacceptable or unprofessional attitude, and this has a snowball effect, since it gives a signal to others that in government, non-professional behavior is tolerated and there is no premium to hardcore professional work. And I think this is a great reason for the cynicism that we find in the young officers when they say that nothing is really going to change. And even if we work, it isn't going to make any difference in the system. And because of that, you do find a number of people who are creative, who have joined civil service to make a change. You see them leaving civil service quite early on in their careers as well. I'd just like to say, lastly, one word about the growing number of women in civil service. And I feel that because a number of women who join civil service during the common training program, they outperform their male colleagues. But when they go to their workplaces, a number of them are already married, some of them do get married. And I keep getting this feedback from my male colleagues in civil service that there are problems in work, and especially the political bosses not really wanting to work with a female officer who's been posted in field positions. So I believe there are, apart from the fact that because when they get married, it's difficult to juggle, to balance out their family commitments with the professional commitments. I think also there are a number of biases which are still at play at workplaces. So these were just a few thoughts that I had about the subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. P. Very, very good. I really appreciate what you said. And this is, I think we need to get you to do a bigger seminar with us, because I've never seen a civil servant being that honest about its service. And quite frankly, I think the larger amount of problems come from this training that we have, where we give a sense of entitlement to these people. And that sense of entitlement then permeates through society. So it's a cultural thing that we have here. There's a book on culture that I recently read, Joseph Henrich, and he says that culture is a strong determinant of even evolution. But our culture is one of idleness, and our culture is one of self-entitlement, and our culture is one of, so I don't know what we can do in this. So I'll turn to Javed Hassan, who is the chairman of NAVTEC, doing a lot of skill training, a very vocal Twitter colleague. Javed Sahab, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum. My title was going to be a old Rolling Stone song. I don't know if you've heard it. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you get what you need. Probably that's true for my particular talk as well. You probably won't get what you want. I don't know if you'll get what you need as well, but let's see. But this is generally the case also with the labor market here. Basically, neither is the industry getting what it wants, not necessarily even what the students need. And there's a huge amount of issues here which need to be addressed. One of the key things to realize is that there are about 4 million young people entering the labor market every year. Of these, only about 700,000 enter the university stream, and about 400,000 get any formal training. So Nadim's question that why should the state be involved in training? Of the 4 million, less than 1 million are getting any form of training. So the state is actually very negligibly involved. Where it is involved, where there's this NAFTAC has been involved in a number of schemes, of youth training schemes, and I'll really focus on that. And these are as a way of sort of trying to say what we are doing for youth. It's questionable how effective they have been, but let's talk about earlier schemes. There have been 2 schemes earlier, which have been 100,000 each, and they have been really designed from the top. They've come from basically on a basis that central planner, government knows what is best, what should be trained, who should be trained, what courses should be given, and we direct the institute, the TEFTAs, to get so many students in plumbing, so many students as welders, so many students as electricians. There is some nominal linkage with the industry, and it's very often based on the capacity in the training institutes, whether it's welding, plumbing, whatever you have, these traditional skills. There is little consideration for what the students themselves want or what the youth particularly would care to learn. But we have a capacity that has to be utilized, and the government knows best. That has been the traditional approach to skilling youth. And it's very much capacity driven, it's very much central planning, it's very much about what we know best and what you should learn. What we have found traditionally is that for 100,000 spaces, we have found it difficult, or the data is it has been difficult to even fill that capacity. Very often, one is going around villages, towns, trying to get the capacity filled in, and reluctantly you have youth coming in to these institutes for getting the training, whether it's in plumbing, electricians, whatever it is. And having been enrolled, you have a high level of dropouts. Traditionally, it has been as high as 20-30%, in some courses as high as 50%. So the government has basically gone around deciding what to train and sort of really commandeered, have rounded up youth to come and get trained. They have started the courses and then basically dropped out. So in a sort of oblique manner, you have got an idea what the motivation was of those kids coming to train in this place. They were essentially not motivated and not particularly excited about doing what they were being asked to do. And so the other point was, once they were actually certified, trained, what Amar Durrani said, deployability, I can't pronounce that word, so I use the word employability. Basically, whether they were employed or used their own skills to gain some sort of revenue, we found that of these trained, less than 60% were getting trained. In some cases as low, in some institute as low as 40%. So first you have 30% dropouts, then you have, of those who have stayed, less than 60% are actually getting economically engaged, having learned these skills. So there's a high wastage, and I think that's a proxy for seeing how motivated they are and how interested they were in learning whatever was being taught to them. So this time round, it was decided we'll have another Prime Minister's youth training scheme, which is called Kamyab Jawan. And the assumption we started off basically that central planning doesn't know best. We do not know what the youth know. That was the first premise. The second premise was we do not know what's good for them. Third, we also made a premise that we do not know where they should be getting the jobs. And let's start with that premise, which is a difficult one for a policymaker, because policymakers normally start by assuming that they know so many things. And if we start with a premise where you don't know what, how do you actually design a program? So the basis of this designing this program was, we will train about 100,000 youth, skill them, but we will, the underlying assumption would be in in allocating the resources to various institutes, that there should be 80% employability. And Amir, the word I'm using that because it's easier for me to pronounce, is deployability. It's employability means whether they get jobs with a company or they use the skills to get their jobs themselves, it is all fine, so long as they use those skills to earn something out of it. And that was really the basis of it. And what we asked was the institutes that we will allocate you, say 50 or 100 or 60 youth or in a particular training course, depending on the demand you can get from the youth. And we will not restrict you to plumbing, traditional courses. You can get artificial intelligence, coding, Internet of Things, cloud computing, plumbing, cooking, whatever it is, you feel that you can get the greatest demand from youth. Now, the one criteria we said we will have this done in number of tranches. So those institutes that do extremely well in terms, because we'll have tracer studies which will do extremely well, will actually get more in the second tranche. So in the first tranche, out of the 100,000, we started off with 20,000. Now, the interesting thing was there were some traditional courses being offered, but there was a lot of new courses that came through, which we had not thought about. We also found out there were some really interesting institutes. We had, things like, as I said, Internet of Things, cloud computing, CAD, high-end beautician treatment, various things. They all came about. Now, one of the key things why we were keen that we should see the demand of what the students want to learn is because we, as Nadeem said, we don't want to be in the business of training ourselves. If there's sufficient demand being created by these students, that's a proxy for knowing what kind of jobs are available and what the students or young youth want to do. And moreover, if once, depending on what the employability is later on, if it is seen as being successful, they will naturally generate demand later on. It would not be required that the state keeps having to subsidize this. We can give some. So this should be just as a way to get it catalyzed, as a catalyst rather than as something that goes on forever. For these, initially of the 100,000 spaces, we opened up 20,000 places. And this was the first tranche, which was in February. And we got 210,000 applications. Now, please remember, in the previous design courses, we were getting less than the number that was advertised. This time, for every space, we were getting 10 applicants. Interestingly, a lot of the applicants were MSCs in computing, BSCs in engineering, and the question that each student, each youth who was applying was asked, why is he doing? One of the key things was about a motivation. Why do you want to do this particular course? We are not interested in just training for the sake of training. You have to demonstrate why would you be interested in. And the key was the fact is that they could get jobs if many of them said if we had done this particular certification, there was a job available in Middle East or somewhere else where they could have got jobs. Now, I don't know how far that will come true because this is still ongoing, but one of the things that happened after a few weeks of starting the courses, basically COVID struck, and after 6 weeks of training, it basically had to be closed down, unfortunately. And in October this year, we started again these courses, and we were expecting a large number of dropouts. Of the 20,000 that were approached, we had only taken, because we were only taking those people who we thought would be motivated. We took 17,000. Of those 17,000, only 1,000 have dropped out. Now, again, remember, in the previous design courses, there was something like 30% dropouts. In this particular case, after 5 months or 6 months of hiatus, only 1,000 out of 17,000 dropped out. It just gives some idea that there is a high level of interest in what they are doing. Moreover, while there was COVID, there was a regular barrage of questions and demand from these students that they would want to continue the course, and we should reopen it as quickly as possible. Now, the point I'm trying to make is there's been a lot of talk here about youth not being interested, demotivated, mentally disabled, etc., etc. My view is we're probably going about it the wrong way. We as institutes, as policymakers, try and assume what we know is best for the youth. Let's not assume that. Let's not assume that we know what they should be learning, how they should be learning it. Let's try and design stuff as in the manner where they can learn. The world is full of new opportunities. There's all sorts of new trades coming. And if we try and, to a certain degree, cater to what their needs are, what they would want to do, there's a greater chance of getting them motivated or interested. That sense of idleness is less likely if we actually respond to their world vision as it may be. And let's not assume that their world vision is good or bad. Let's not have any judgmental analysis about how they should be thinking. And there is a strong, I noticed in the talks earlier, there is a strong sort of, I hate to say, moral stance about how the youth should be. My view is let's try and cut away from that. Let's assume that the youth is as a rational being and will be given the right incentives, will actually respond to that. And rather than trying to teach, so even in the courses, rather than trying to teach them morality, ethics, we have tried to move away from that. What we have tried to do is that if you do this, there is this chance of getting a job. If you do that, there is this opening potentially there. You must learn the skill. This is what this skill will learn to. It is not about, there is obviously workplace cooperation. There's all sorts of views about how, and what we're finding is many of these people are already starting to get engaged in the workplace through freelancing, with going and trying to work. So because there's a continuous monitoring process. Now, I have to say, this is just an experiment. It's if you randomized controlled trial, if you want, even though that is a controversial topic right now. We have right now done, 17,000. We'll hopefully roll out at the end of this 5 to 6 months. We'll see what the employability is. But the critical thing is a lot of these students, we asked them, many of them felt the university courses they went to were a waste of time. They felt they could have done much better if they had been learning short-term courses. 4 years of university did not necessarily give them skills, which actually demotivated them. It was a huge waste of time. If you can imagine, if you're 17, 18, and you have 4 years of doing something which you're not particularly interested in, or where you don't feel any immediate rewards, I would get demotivated despite all the best of advantages. So we need to be asking ourselves, what are we doing with this youth to get them demotivated? Let's not assume that they're intellectually challenged or they're backwards. Let's actually put it on ourselves. Are we responding to the youth in the manner where they actually feel that they should be motivated? So these are some of the points. This is a test. I like to say it's an experiment that is going on. I can't say we are successful yet. We'll have to see what the outcomes are after the 6 months. See what the employability, deployability, economic engagement is. Hopefully, it will be more than 80%. That was our benchmark. If we do that, we need to further test it. We need to promote those areas where there's greater demand further. But the premise of this discussion was idleness, mental incapacity, mental disability. There might be that, I'm sure, but there is a huge issue of how traditionally, at least in my particular area, which is skills training, how it was being undertaken. In the manner it was being undertaken, it was sure to make people demotivated, idle, and mentally harmed. We were certainly working towards that, and what we needed to do, and we are trying to do, is see how we can change that. I'm not sure we have achieved that, but I think the greater onus is on us as policymakers to see how we are treating our youth and how we are motivating them or enabling them to achieve their aspirations than necessarily trying to say what is wrong with the youth. With that, I'll stop. But this is an ongoing trial, and you know, I'm quite happy to take criticism if we don't get it right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Javed sir. Thank you very much. I think we've had great talks, wonderful. I've learned a lot. I'm very happy with this webinar. Thank you, Amir. Thank you, Safdar. But Safdar sir, let me just come back to you very quickly. This whole stunting thing, I find it a little difficult to understand. Are you telling me that Pakistan is a mentally challenged nation? If so, then I'd like to go to Rizwan Taj Sahab, Dr. Saab, to tell us, if we are a mentally challenged nation, what can we do? Because I find it, this premise to begin with, I find it very difficult that the whole nation is mentally challenged, the whole nation is stunted. I find that very bizarre. But nevertheless, if that's so, then I'll turn to Dr. Rizwan Taj. But Safdar Sahab, first, can you confirm, are we mentally challenged?
Ji. Different perspectives. I edit a journal, and I have received an article from Ireland, a Pakistani origin author, which I've sent in the review process, and its title is Evolving Colonialism, and the author suggests that the impacts of colonialism are with us. And the author, in a very rough way, suggests that we are almost, all of us have mental problems, which are a legacy of the colonial experience. So what I wanted to say was that this is a very, very complex issue. Dr. Rizwan Taj has spoken partly about it, but in the lower, you see, stunting, how many percentage of the children face stunting? About 40% of the working class or lower strata of the society. And there, the science tells us that nutrition is linked with the IQ as well as emotional balance. So that link is, in my own,
Dr. Rizwan Taj Sahab,
is very much well established that nutrition has very clear linkages with the mental health. The rest, I think Dr. Rizwan Taj can enlighten.
Dr. Rizwan Taj, we are a mentally challenged nation. So why don't we just fold up and say, okay, fine, we are now, IQ is low, we are totally zero. What should we do? I mean, and secondly, I'd also like to point out, you know, this thing that we make too much of abuse, etc., etc. When I go back in history and I look at Alexander the Great, for example, or Tariq bin Walid, or, you know, all these famous
Shelley, Keats, you name it, all the painters.
characters, those guys went out, conquered the world. And when I read history, many of them were abused. Many of them were physically abused. It was common in those days. So what gives that we don't have the mental fortitude to do that today? And we're sitting there complaining, oh, you know, I had this in my past and I'm so mentally challenged, etc. Doctor, is psychology also making us weak?
Okay, right. When you talk about us being mentally challenged or stunted, that applies only to a certain proportion of the population, not to the whole of Pakistan. And it's not just Pakistan, it's the rest of the world as well. You have countries which are overpopulated, which have these nutritional problems, which you have the birth related factors, birth injury related factors. You have the early childhood problems, illnesses, meningitis, everything else, which contributes to the stunting part. But you must understand that is only a certain proportion of the population. It has nothing to do with the whole of Pakistan, and we should not probably project this kind of message across. And again, as I've said, this is common in the poor people who are not able to get it's also diet related. Absolutely, Safdar Sahab is right about that. If you do not get a proper diet in childhood, there is a likely to be physical deformity or physical size problems or brain size problems. Again, limited to the very poor strata of society. We here sitting in Islamabad can only imagine what a person in rural Sindh, say, how she delivers a child, how she has 5-10 kids and she has no way to feed them. The obstetric services are so poor and so deficient that it is horrifying to see how things are. But this is not about just Pakistan, it's all the poor countries across the world. Bangladesh may be a
Historically, many people have risen out of that. I know John D. Rockefeller, for example, was very poor and he managed to conquer the world. There are so many examples of that. I think, quite frankly, now there's a culture in Pakistan that we tend to give up. We say, oh, you know, the stunting has happened, this has happened, so we should give up. The problem is, where does this idleness problem? I'll give you another example. I run a small university. I can't get these youth, I was just talking to them in the chat, I can't get them to even attend a webinar. They feel they can't attend a webinar. I can't get them to read a book. Now, this has become very common in our culture. It's got nothing to do with stunting or whatever. We've got a culture, and then we'll go to Arifa and Bibi. It emanates from the top of society. There's a sense of entitlement at the top of society. And everybody lives with a sense of entitlement. So why should anybody struggle?
Absolutely. The challenge is that how to motivate people to develop a very broad perspective to life. Here, what happens is when I look at colleagues and everybody else, 80% of their life revolves around their job, including their social, occupational, social life, including their personal life. And very few people are actually interested in other areas that you mentioned. And that is one of the challenges of lifestyle advice that we need to inculcate from a very early childhood. And that is the challenge here. Now, Arifa has given you a very broad vision about the civil service. And of course, I'm also part of the government structure. And we have very serious problems with them. And we see these people who think that they are in control of everything and they are the decision makers. And while we as professionals are nobody to challenge what they decide. And the section officer in grade 17 is more powerful than I am. And he thinks he can just block everything and not worry about it. And then you have got the senior people who only are interested in what they can get out of the system. So the culture problem is always there. So I will just come back to the whole seminar that we are conducting. We need to address this from the childhood onwards. And we need to address the childhood factors and then start from there and how we can motivate and create a culture where the child develops a positive, strong personality and is able to not just work or not just do that, but also develop other interests in life, which are equally important. So, एक stage के बाद you can't do that change. जिस तरह Arifa ने कहा कि once they reach the civil service, they are actually, the personality is formed. When you reach your 23, 22, 23, 24, you really cannot change that much. Then you have to look at other factors, how to change your behavior, how to look at things which can be changed. So it is the problem lies in the childhood, early childhood onwards, where we can make some interventions that would be extremely helpful and would certainly pay off in the long run. And that is where we are really deficient and we are lacking. So that is the answer to the question that you.
Okay, thank you. Arifa Bibi, thank you very much. You made a very, very good presentation. I think I invite you to give us your paper. We would like to publish it in the PID or whatever data you have. We'd like to talk to you about that. We will do that off this, but let me ask you very quickly, Arifa Bibi. Is civil service training, the way Lord Macaulay did it, is this something that we should put in the past? Should we get rid of this civil service training? I've gone and taught there many times. I've asked many of the participants this question. How many books do you read? And they tell me they don't read any books at all, right? I talk to your lecturers. They say the sense of entitlement is so deep, they don't want to learn anything. When you ask them to read anything, they don't want to read anything. So the question that I'm coming to is very simple. Can we solve this problem without a civil service reform? Because civil service sits at the top of society, it controls everything, as the Dr. Saab said. I didn't want to ask the Dr. Saab, but Dr. Saab said it himself. The civil service controls everything. The merit system is the civil service system in this country. You join the civil service, you're there. If you don't join the civil service, you're not. Can we progress without a civil service reform?
No, we can't. But you see, one thing is very obvious to me, that civil service reform has to take care of the entire human resource value chain as such. It's not just concentrating upon training or recruitment or promotions. You've got to look at the whole thing as such. And I think the problem with training really is, that we don't have quality training institutions. People join training institutions because they are out of favor, to be very honest. It's as Director General of Civil Services Academy, as DG of NIM, as Chief Instructor at Senior Management Wing, I can tell you that I had great difficulty attracting really good civil servants who were role models in my view to come and join the civil service, to come and join the training institutions and to bring about a change, because training institutions are not considered the mainstream institutions at all. So anybody who spends a lot of time at training institutions like I did will certainly not be considered a successful officer as such. You talked about the sense of entitlement, and that's starting from the training institutions, and I will not rebut it. I will not rebut it, despite the fact that I think training institutions do try not to inculcate this. But when I send out, for example, when I send out my trainees to for field trips in different districts, they are treated like royalty by the deputy commissioner, by the superintendent of police, and this despite the fact that from the training institution side, we always tell them that they have to be treated like ordinary citizens, that they will pay for their own lodging, they will pay for their own food intake, etc. Despite that, the way they are treated gives them the feeling that they are apart from the citizenry, that they have been recruited, to serve. So why call us civil servants? I mean, we should be public servants as such. Change the nomenclature completely. I've always felt that civil servants are rarely civil, and they are certainly not servants.
Thank you. Thank you. Javed Saab, you face probably the same dilemma I do. Merit does not prevail in this society. There is absolutely no merit. And I feel I'm creating PhDs and MPhils who are going to rot in life. They're going to go nowhere. You're probably creating skills that are not necessary, that nobody wants. I'd much rather get a plumber who's got no skills because, hey, I don't want to pay market prices. So the question is, when merit doesn't prevail, what are we trying to do? Are we just training people because we feel good about it? Or is there a purpose to this?
Can I just answer the earlier question about
whatever you like,
about people feeling entitled, and civil servants behaving in a certain way? If I may, I'm just as a positive view. If the entire incentive mechanism within the society is such that you feel entitled and you feel you should command rather than be a public servant, why should you not behave that way? As a rational being, one responds to the entire incentive system within the overall mechanism. One cannot divorce oneself from the overall system. So my point is that we often say we can train them, you can send them to Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, send them 10 years in investment banking. But if he comes within this system, he will behave within that, because the incentive structures are such that they are, your best rewards are to adapt yourself to the system rewards. So I think, I don't think the trainings is that much of an issue. with regards to your question specifically to me, we by and large, the forced training that we were doing was generally a waste of money. You know, this business, oh, we need to train 30,000 plumbers without necessarily deciding what by and large, the plumbers should want to be plumbers themselves. They really should be driven by their own motivation. We should not be central planners deciding how many plumbers, how many welders, how many. That's not how it happens in Germany. Doesn't happen in most developed markets. Really, the skills should be driven by the market needs, by the young people themselves deciding what they want to do. They might know something which industry right now might not know. So they might want to learn skills which we may not think are necessarily useful now, but they will get somewhere. You know, the gaming skill in Korea is one of the biggest industries. Now, if they had relied on their parents to determine whether gaming should be done, most of these kids would not be in the gaming industry. They have come about because they wanted to do it. They probably hid from their parents and went and did it. So my point is, there is too much governmental decision making in skills training. If I may sort of indirect, we should be very wary of what we can do. And whatever intervention we do, we should be a bit modest about it. And at best, we are experimenting. At best, we should try and be catalysts to allow the young people to discover what they can best deploy themselves, and industry to match them. That's really what, trying to, train 200,000, 500,000 and all that, while it may feel very good as a government official to do that, and it gives us brownie points, that should not be our fundamental role. What we should be doing is really seeing how the young can actually deploy their skills, where they might want to learn, and how the industry might be able to utilize. That should be our intermediary role, should be much more than necessarily forcefully training people. If I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's really
fair point. Amir Durrani, I'd like to ask you very simply. You are an entrepreneur, young entrepreneur. I tell most of the kids who have done anything at all, kids who are studying overseas or kids who are going to study overseas, I tell them, stay there, don't come back. I say that with a heavy heart, but I say that. So don't come back, this country is not ready for you, because this country has no respect for merit. Like Dr. Taj just now said, there is no respect for merit. A doctor, for example, retires in grade 20. An engineer retires in grade 20. And most of our kids know the incentive system in this country, that you can do whatever you like. The incentive system is so skewed that you will not be able to do anything. You can only succeed if you migrate. In that environment, do you blame the kids for being idle, for taking on this mantle that, hey, if I join something that gives me a sense of entitlement, that's okay, which is basically a government job, because outside government, there is nothing. Entrepreneurship is very difficult in this country. You've tried it. So tell us, what are you telling the youth? That there is opportunity in this country, Amir?
Okay, Nadeem Saab, I think I'll start off with the one basic thing. Look, high risk translates to high opportunity. So it's a bit like saying that if I'm asked to build a pipeline in Pakistan and I'm asked to build a pipeline in the middle of post 9/11 in Afghanistan, yes, the risks will be high going to Afghanistan, but I am the kind of individual that will choose Afghanistan because I know that risk comes with rewards. So high risk, high rewards. This is one of the reasons why I think that Pakistan is definitely the place to be. I also think that much of the mantra of going west, I always compare this to the west of the imagination, which is Godziman and Godziman, the definer of the American move west, right? The herdsmen and, basically the frontiersmen. And I think that, eventually when you go there, you find that the youth settles for a mediocrity of sorts, and the exceptions of our youth going there and making it big, like our friends like Dr. Adil Najam, yourself, if I can count that, or a few of us, but if you by and large, I mean, they're going there for a life which is nothing but basically a daily 9-to-5 grind. Now, that to me is not the future of work. So I think that my second posit is that those people who think that they'll go settle there, get a mortgage, $100,000 in debt, everything. It's just not a life that is the future of 21st century and what the youths need to be heading towards. I think this was something which is, and if I may use a very loose term, and I'm sorry, I always give you very layman analogies, but you know, in the 70s, wo ek aata tha, Dubai chalo, Dubai chalo, Dubai chalo. So what's what Dubai chalo ke andar? Let me tell you this. I mean, in the 70s, when I was going to school, the thought of actually going west was on, even for education below, let's say, a master's was never considered, right? In fact, those people went abroad in bachelors who could not meet the merit in our country and could not get into the best institutions. So I think the second point I want to make is that, you know, this whole thing about migration is as much about idleness as it is about anything else, because I think it's the idle youth who think that they will go there and get an opportunity, but once they go there, they get stuck, then they come home and tell you rosy stories. But I think that by and large, it is the idle youth that wants to go abroad. You know, that's my own reading. Yes, we all think that, you know, and you know, I'll stop on that one. But answering your third thing, that, you know, what is an entrepreneur? To be very honest, I think the whole thing about youth and entrepreneurship is very misleading. And I want to say that very openly, that, you know, the average age of an innovator entrepreneur is above 40. I mean, you can read McKinsey, you can read all the books around the world, you will know that. So essentially what I'm saying, and my message on idleness is that really the creative part where you build, or you decide and you acquire the skill sets that make you an entrepreneur is the youth. It's that 15 to 29, the age which we are basically forming. Like you form your personality until you are 15, you form your professional personality and you acquire all the skills that are needed to be deployable. And it's not that difficult to pronounce, Javed. But basically, I find the basic difference is that we are creating, and I think my last point that I want to leave with you is that because we are creating an employment mindset is why youth are also going abroad, because they're going there because they still find massive job opportunities. So I'll stop there. It's not been a very cogent answer, but you know, it's getting very late. So sorry about that.
But basically what you're saying is there's opportunity in Pakistan.
Yes, because it's a high risk environment. I mean, it makes sense.
Very good. But yet at the same time, Amir Durrani, the Supreme Court and CDA threw out all the khokhas in Islamabad. At the same time, the CDA and the Supreme Court threw out all youth hostels in Pakistan. At the same time, the Supreme Court has thrown out every youthful activity in every city of Pakistan. Is that opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, there are two answers to that, Nadeem Saab. The first one is, yes, that's exactly opportunity. That's why we have the likes of Malik Riaz, right? Because while everyone was being thrown out, he found the opportunity. So again, I say high risk, high opportunity. Okay. Now, second part to your answer is that is basically that I think we define opportunity very limited. To us, opportunity is making money, opportunity is getting a good, I don't know, where is the value creation? So to me, for example, anybody who rises to get the whole system about, let's say, you know, getting COCAs fixed, getting the tax system fixed, getting the judicial system, the laws fixed, that's entrepreneurship. And I think that's what we are losing sight of. So to me, for example, the biggest entrepreneur right now, and not going smoke up, you know where, is you. And I think the youth should understand that, because you are actually taking the largest risk and you're making the youth realize that it's not just about making money. So I think that's, again, this boils down to a very boring subject, but I think some of us want to talk about that, which is what is growth? Does quality of life translate to growth, or does money and GDP translate to quality of life? I think the answers are very difficult. So for a lot of youth, I think it's time to get out of this conundrum, this sort of desperation, the desire to be suicidal, drugs, everything. And there is nothing, so I'm sorry, there's nothing Calvinistic about my diatribe, Javed. I'm not saying, yes, we should be able to do everything. But I think opening the doors to the mind door of the youth, to saying, hey guys, you know, you still make a difference if you just start, for example, a form and enable all Coca-Colas and find a new law that CDA can't displace them. So, you know, that's my view, sir.
Okay, thanks. Khurram Shabir Saab, got a question. Khurram Shabir Saab, would you like to ask? Madam Shabir is not here. Oh, he's there. Go ahead.
Yes, hello, Assalamu alaikum. Yes, I just want to ask the panelists that the next era is the era of artificial intelligence. Jobs would be done by intelligent machines. So like this will induce like, I think, more idleness. So how do you see this? I mean, like would this create like problems or like what? And is there any solution to it? Thank you, sir.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Or should I go back to the panel?
There's Ijaz.
Go ahead. Okay, go ahead, Ijaz sir. Ijaz Minhas sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sir. In our TVET sector, curriculum of our training courses is outdated and not according to the need of the current industry and job market. B. Many institutions in public and private, many training institutions in public and private sector do not have requisite machinery and equipments in functional conditions, which are necessary to impart technical skill to their trainees. Their practical classes are not held, and practical exams are not taken as required. But they are producing the technical graduates, technical diploma holders, certificate are given to them. And it is compromising the quality of technical training and job opportunities for the youth. My question is, why authorities and TAVTAs are not taking notice of this situation in real terms? Thank you.
Thank you. Ikramul Haq Sahab, you want to say something? You've written something in chat. Go ahead. Ikramul Haq Sahab, are you there? Dr. Sahab? I don't think he's there. Okay, Mahmoud Khalid. Mahmoud Khalid. Mahmoud Khalid.
Sir, thank you. It has been a very enlightening discussion. My simple query to the panel is that normally the risk is good for future success, but always we look for some kind of a fallback option. So do you think that in a society in which every bread earner has to secure for his family, education, health, and these sort of things, they would always play with a very risk-averse kind of a behavior? So whether it pertains to going into civil service and become an kind of a dead wood, or taking some other kind of a job in which the rents are there. So if in a society we can develop the fallback options in the form of social protection, not just related to very severe kind of conditions, but ordinary education, health facilities, maybe then the people would be willing to take risk and they are going to do what they really love to do.
Okay, great. Okay, folks, let me go back to the panel. Arifa Bibi, would you like to start? Any reactions to these things? Any last thoughts that we can close? Arifa Sabui?
Just a couple of points which were raised. One about curriculums of training institutions being outdated, although the questioner, the person who posed the question, was referring to technical skills. But I think it's I can't comment about NAFTAC, but certainly about public sector training institutions imparting a kind of common training program, whether it is at the Civil Services Academy or other institutions. I tend to agree to a certain extent, but I think that in the past few years, there has been a very concerted effort to change not only the curriculum, but also the way we are imparting training. And, looking at the data, the big data that is being generated and how it is to be analyzed, how it is to be used while formulating policy is something which is being at this point in time taught at the training institutions in partnership with the Harvard University. So while changes are taking place, I think that certainly a lot needs to be done. About risk aversion, why we should take risks. I do tend to agree with the earlier views that Mr. Durrani expressed, and I think that that's something that I find in civil service as well. People getting comfortable in their own zones and not moving out of it and seeking challenges, whether it's on the pretext of NAB coming down on them or whatever. But I think that not only your own personal growth, but also making organizations in the public sector better can come about only if one challenges oneself. I think that is so important. And invariably, I feel that when you challenge yourself, you may not get the entire thing that you aimed at, but certainly something good does come about.
Thank you, Dee. Thank you. Dr. Javed Hassan Saab, would you like to say any last words, answer these questions? Javed gone?
I'm here.
Go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
You go ahead.
Yeah, there was this comment about the skill courses not being up to date and out of fashion and probably not relevant. Probably very true. All of it, absolutely true. Total rubbish. Get rid of them. But it won't make the slightest bit of difference. We can get the most up to date, and we are trying to get the most up to date. We are getting competency-based training. We're getting the newest courses from all the world, but frankly speaking, it will make the slightest bit of difference. It won't make 2 bit of difference. Basically, if you have an overall system where the greatest rewards are by getting 16% dollar returns on IPPs or some fixed tariff on some fertilizer factory or some very overall system is working on a rentier mechanism, why the hell do you need any skills? The skills in Vietnam are not being driven because they have a fantastic TVET system. Because they have an economic system which is demanding skills. And once you demand skills, the skills automatically start happening. So let's get away from this illusion that we have fantastic institutes and we get them right curriculum and we get them the right trainers, and all of a sudden there will be skilled people and they'll start producing. Pakistan's productivity will start going up. It won't happen. Let's be honest. Until we get rid of basically a rentier economy where there is very little reward for being skilled, why should one get skilled? So, and where they are getting skilled, where there isn't rentierism. One of the sectors which there is a lot of demand, which we have seen a lot of focus, where people are coming themselves, which I've sort of alluded to, is the IT sector. So many of these kids who are learning cloud computing, they are very motivated. They are not suffering from idleness. They are not suffering from mental incapacity. They are not suffering from all this because this is an area where their skills are rewarded. So they are coming, learning a bit of cloud computing, getting freelance jobs. They are making 50,000, 100,000, some of them 3 lakh rupees, and they're very happy. They don't even probably suffer from depression. They probably go and have a good time. Now, it is about incentive mechanisms in the system. So I'm sorry, I'm probably the only one here who's deviating from this theme that we should do some nice things and train them nicely and have good courses. If the overall system does not promote skill seeking, there won't be skill seeking. We can talk as much and we can have all these nice webinars and talk about these wonderful things. But frankly speaking, if the overall system actually mitigates against skill seeking, against utilizing your full facilities. You can be the Einstein of this world. Einstein didn't happen because he was a brilliant person. He was in a particular environment where there was a need for that kind of thinking. So I think we should think about that for a second. And very often, yes, I take it on board that NAFTAC is changing the curriculum. It is going towards competency based. It is going towards better training. We have a whole reform program. But if the overall mechanism does not require skills people, there will be no need. It won't be very useful. Sorry.
Well said, well said, well said. Thank you very much. Well said. This is exactly why I tell kids to go overseas and not stay here, because merit, the market merit does not prevail here. But we'll get to that soon. But I appreciate what you said. You made the point far better than I did. We'll come to you, Amit, just one second. Dr. Saab, Dr. Taj Saab, your last words, your thoughts?
I think it's a very enlightening discussion that I've learned a lot of things today, and I fully agree with Javed Saab and what his observations are. But for Pakistan to survive and thrive, we have to make some changes. We have to do something about that. And my feeling is that if we start at a very early level and we start looking at the young children in the school, and we look at ways to encourage them to continue their education, and we look at the personality factors. And I'm not talking about very complicated things. I'm talking about basic stuff about life skills, lifestyle interventions, that we can train them, and we can train the teachers to give them some kind of reinforcement for the future. We will be able to create a population base of young people who will then make the right choices for the future that Pakistan needs or the world needs, and they will move into that direction. And he spoke about the IT sector, but again, the health sector is also one of the areas which is also not doing quite good. So I think that the message from today is that we, as senior people who can do something about it, we must do our bit for the system, that we can inculcate some kind of motivation for the youth to work for the future and make the right choices that is of their own interest. And then we need to have a merits-based system where they can flourish and they can progress, and then they can motivate other people, other younger people as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Safdar Sohail Saab, now the two organizers of the webinar, come on, sum it up for us.
Yeah, well, I think we had a good discussion, and thank you very much for your kind of moderating the whole thing and bringing people in the discussion. The way I look at is, I'll refer back to the well-being framework for the youth that is internationally recognized, which says that there are 5 major elements to the well-being, that is cognitive, sociocultural, nutritional, emotional, and physical. And for all these 5, there are internal factors. Many of them were covered by Dr. Rizwan Taj, and there are external factors. Now, keeping this in mind, then there is this macro level, meso level, and micro level. Many of the things which have been said about the macro environment, system, economic, they're right, and we need to change those things, incentive structures. But I think on all these 5 major elements, we can positively impact many of the internal and external factors. A lot of things have to be done by the parents, by the communities, by the school, by the education, by the organizations. I think a lot of such elements have been highlighted, which should help us. There's a lot of need of this intersectoral discussion today. It's good that we have people from so many different domains talking about a phenomena which is still scientifically less understood. So we have identified many of those internal and external factors which can be positively impacted today, or for the people who are still very young, adolescent, even younger than that. And if we focus on those elements when they become young and enter into the labor market, we can expect better things to happen. I'll simply conclude. We have talked less about the external environment. Dr. Rizwan Taj has taken good care of internal, and he was kind because I requested him that do cover the socio cultural environment, and he covered that also. But I think we need to have a much bigger focus. Mahmood Khalid has identified a very important area of an external environment. Uh, in IT sector, as Javed Hassan talked about the sector, its dynamism. So we have done a study in Islamabad on digital labor. It's a classical example of lot of work for pittance. Average incomes of the freelancers in Pakistan is very, very low. We have success stories, 300,000 a day or month, whatever. The point Mahmood Khalid is making is that give them a minimum protection comfort so that their innovativeness, their inventions, their creativity can be unleashed. So these are the kind of linkages which at the sectoral level, we talk about taking the social security or social protection to the informal sector. How would we do that? And if we do that, what kind of results would it produce in those? Khurram talked about AI. This is true that the future of work is actually, particularly in the West, but in Pakistan also, we can expect much higher level of unemployment, or different kind of future of work is very different. So here, I think we should be mindful of those linkages which may exist between providing minimum social security to at least the creative workers in the ICT sector. And we will be very happy to sit with NAVTEC and follow people on the jobs, that what happens 6 months down the road, 1 year down the road. That is also extremely important. And we don't say that you moralize in your classrooms, but there are many secular behavioral and attitudinal aspects which you can address with the help of social psychologists, perhaps, and those small tips can make a big difference in their life. So, Dr. Nadeem, I'll finally say that thank you very much. This is an extremely important topic, but very complex and unstudied. And next time you bring youth also on this forum. Let's have maybe from your university, we talk to 5, 10, 20 people, explain to them the issue, and then listen to them that how do they look at their so-called idleness and get their view. That may enlighten us even more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Amer Durrani, sir, how would you sum it up?
So I think if you allow me to respond to two questions that were asked, and then one-line summary on this, right? So the question on AI, I think, is very important. And I think the question, and I would beg to disagree with Sohail Saab, that, and also I think Javed, both of them said things which I think if you just look 10 years hence, the two most used fields, Khalid, are, if you look at what is in freelancing Pakistan, is coding and content provision. Both coding and content provision are being replaced by AI faster than you can even imagine. There were, for example, just yesterday, I got an AI-driven news analysis for Arab news, which basically you can't tell if a human has written it or somebody has just written them. Basically, it's a machine writing it, right? So both of these are nothing but what I call manual labor in IT. They should be underpaid, and that's not really needs to be protected. Now, on the question of protection, I think that the question on AI, Khalid, my answer to you is if you read what the world is telling you about reskilling, AI will create more jobs than it's going to replace. This is a known fact. And I will not go into details. Please have an offline conversation. I'll get you material to read why AI will create more jobs than it's going to replace. Okay, so I'm not fearful that the job market is contracting. It's just reskilling, and we have to adapt to that. I think the other important thing is that on this whole discussion around, why we are not, and basically what I understood today is that we have a culture of what we call provision, prayers, and patronage, right? So that's our national narrative. Given that incentive structure, which Javed also said it's a rentier society, I think that I would actually be all out, all out. I don't want social protection, but I am thinking very hard, and that's why reason I work with Safdar Suhail Saab, is that I think cutting out government and cutting out unnecessary expenditures and basically doing UBI, universal basic income, may actually change. That's one experiment I'm still thinking may work. So Nadeem sir, I'm not saying that there is social protection. I'm not in favor of somebody who can't find work and just paying them just because they can't find work, they're not good enough. I'm actually saying that of all the losses we make from the revenue we collect, the fiscal side, maybe it's time to replace it with UBI and just let maybe 80% of the government go. Having said that, the conclusion from today's seminar for me, I still don't have the answer that while my office, I have a ring-fenced environment, Nadeem Saab, where all incentive structures are right, and they have been right for 6 years. There is no, I am still not able to find the willing workers. The supply is so poor. And that's why I organized, and I was very much willing to give time to today's seminar. And I think when the 3 seminars we've had on HR during COVID, pre-COVID, right? The first COVID, you remember them very well, right? Nobody can find a match. There is just not the right supply of young labor. Now, whatever you want to call it, that's the way I put it. And so incentive structure right in my environment, things are not working. Why? I don't know.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. The incentive structure is working very well for me. The incentive structure is working very well for my friends. AI comes or goes, it doesn't matter. We will have Islamabad Club, Sindh Club, Punjab Club. We will sit, the boys will sit there, have fun. And many of them don't work. I have a friend who died, famous golfer, famous everything. He was always proud of the fact that he had never worked a stroke in his life. And he always used to tease me. Your problem is that you're wasting your life. So the issue is when you've got a society where the incentives are so structured. I'm just finishing a paper, Amir, on the stock market. Mahbubul Haq said there were 22 families. We have progressed in the last 50 years. There are now 35 families. There is social protection, Safdar Suhail. There is social protection. I kept telling the World Bank that. 2 people don't believe it because you're following international standards. We have local standards. We've got social protection in this country. People who are protected are our friends. They never go from riches to rags. And yes, you may quote Malik Riaz. He's probably the only guy who's from rags to riches. There is extreme social immobility in this country. Yes, there are exceptions that prove the rule. But the social immobility that prevails in this country, where Islamabad Club, Sindh Club, Punjab Club members sit there, lord over society, and they get all the tax-free perks, and their memberships are also gifted to their kids, whereas others, fresh entrants, can't get in. That is the society. This society is about excluding the poor. We did a webinar on that. We exclude the poor. We make sure, I have been to so many houses where one family has been serving them for 4 generations. That tells you what the social mobility is. So when you don't have social mobility, what signals are we giving to the youth? The skill set that is required, and there's a famous economist, Baumol, who wrote about this in 1980 or 90, I think, that the skill set that is required in a society, as Javed said, in a society run by the mafiosi is a mafia skill. You see cowboy movies, it is the cowboy shooting stuff. When you go to the University of Vienna in the early 20th century, you get a set of intellectuals who change the world. When you go to Cambridge in the 20s, you set stuff. So there have been incentive systems in the world that have been created, and that's why I go back to culture. And Henrik makes a good point. Culture matters. Our culture is that of Sindh Club, Punjab Club, and Lord Macaulay. So we are responding to that culture. Our youth is responding to that culture. They know that if they plead with the government, they can get some kind of security and maybe even entry into Sindh Club. That is what everybody is responding to. And I think we need to think about how we change this culture. Maybe we'll do a webinar on that next. Thank you, folks. Thank you, Amir. Thank you, Safdar. Please keep the ideas coming. We're going to do more of these. I really value this. And thank you, everybody, Javed Saab, Dr. Taj Saab, Arifa Bibi, everybody. Thank you. Khuda Hafiz.